Thank you, everyone. All right, it is 2 o'clock. Welcome again to the 68th Annual Conference on World Affairs. This panel is Intelligent Dating and Mating. It is number 2615. My name is Bill Rigler. I'm the Director of University Relations at Naropa University here in Boulder. And I'm pleased to welcome you all to this panel. What does it mean? How do we do it? How do we create the best Tinder profile known to man? These are some of the questions that we'll be addressing in today's panel. With us today, we have 4 very accomplished folks. I just want to very quickly introduce them. To my left, your right, we have Aaron Balick. Aaron is a psychotherapist, a blogger, and author of a new book called The Psychodynamics of Social Networking. Next, we have Matthew Nelson. Matthew is a movement artist, activist, and educator, and a somatic movement educator and researcher. Next, we have Tai Tashiro. Tai integrates the latest social science and storytelling to address questions of relationships. And last, we're very pleased that we have Kathleen Adams. Kathleen is the co-founder of Mama's Hip Hop Kitchen in Harlem, New York City, where I used to live. And just this tremendous social entrepreneur and activist. So please join me in welcoming all of our panelists to Boulder. And to kick it off, we thought that we would have the man who literally wrote the book on this, Aaron, start first. Aaron.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to start off with my main point, so if you leave after the next 6 seconds, you'll get it. Psychologically, we discover ourselves between ourselves and others. That's basically it. It's the way we can't get to know ourselves on our own. We can meditate, and that offers something, but even when you're meditating, I guess if you're doing meditating really well, better than me, you're not having a conversation with yourself. But even when you go quiet, you're having a conversation with yourself. So because we discover ourselves between ourselves and others, relationships can be the most rewarding and the most challenging thing that we do, like absolutely and fundamentally. And I don't want to go too far deeply into developmental psychology, but just as a model, you think about the relationship between a newborn baby and his or her primary caretaker. And that baby has a visceral, emotional, unintegrated experience and comes to learn what that experience is about through the good enough attunement of the mother or primary caretaker. So in a sense, that getting to know oneself kind of goes through the mind of another in order for it to develop. And if we're developing in the best possible way, then that baby, as it grows, also begins to understand the primary caretaker or the mother as another different person, another subjectivity. It's not just as an object that brings you up, but, oh, she has different needs and desires. She's not like me. And this movement between sameness and difference is something that kind of plagues us for the rest of our lives. The ways in which we want people to be like us, and then, of course, they refuse to be because they're different people. So what are you supposed to do about that? I've got 8 minutes, but we'll get as far as we can. So this is a panel on dating and mating, and I would say dating, mating, relationships, and they're all relationships, whether it's dating, mating, or not. And I'm going to start with dating, and I'm going to move a little bit into mating. Now, a lot of people are kind of people get quite nervous about dating. Technology has made that a lot easier in some ways because it's kind of removed a level of complexity, so those first steps can be quite easy. The bad news, I think, is the mating in the relationship is actually much harder than the dating. And technology, and before technology, rom-coms kind of ruin that for us with the expectations they give us about what a perfect relationship is. And in a sense, fairy tales sort of ruin that for us too with the happily ever after. Yeah, because we have to rise to the challenge of relationships. That's what relationships are about. So dating today is a little bit problematic. First of all, because we have a misunderstanding about what compatibility means. And for most people, that means liking the same stuff. And that helps, but that's not where it's at. Compatibility also is something that doesn't come with the package. It's something that's made between two people through negotiation. And that takes time to happen. So what we have in today's world, in a sense, is I know not everybody is on Tinder, but Tinder sort of, most of you probably are. I mean, Tinder, Grindr, Blender, anything with the on it tends to be a way in which people get to know each other. And the trouble is, people aren't necessarily making the distinctions in their own minds about what they want. So finding sex for recreation, I think, is no bad thing. And Grindr, Tinder, Blender can really help you do that. There's probably a lot more I don't know about. But if you're looking for a relationship and you're finding sex for recreation, you're going to end up getting hurt along the way because you think you're just doing this for fun, but then something's not happening. So in a way, you have to know where you are and what you're looking, and you want to look in the right place for it. There's this great metaphor about a guy. Raise your hand if you know about the guy looking for the key underneath the lamppost at night. Yeah, a few of you. Man's like looking under the lamppost for the key that he dropped, and someone comes along and says, what's wrong? He says, I lost my key. And he said, well, where did you lose it? And he said, over there somewhere. And he said, why are you looking over here? He said, well, that's where the light is. Yeah. So we do a little bit of that, yeah? Tinder's a light, and we're like looking for this thing, and it does happen that it can roll out into something great, but it might not happen. If you're on Match.com and you're looking for compatibility because you both like opera music and you're both Democrats, you're going to find that you're going to have to, there's going to be some more that's going to be asked there. And if you find out that one's Republican, the other's a Democrat, there's going to be a whole much bigger ask going on. So what happens when we engage with these apps, and it's not just the apps, it's also Twitter and Facebook, which mediates our relationships these days, is they enable us to have much more, they enable us to fantasize and from psychoanalysis to project and to transfer all sorts of fantasies on these people. So in effect, when we find the right one, we think they're going to be awesome. The ones that we choose anyway. And then we meet them and they are awesome that first time, and they're pretty awesome the second time, and they're kind of all right the third time, and then that thing that annoyed you a little bit on the first date starts to really annoy you on the fourth date, and then you start Tindering again. Yeah? So this is an issue because what makes a good relationship is meeting that first challenge and negotiating it, and then meeting the next challenge and negotiating it, and meeting the next challenge and negotiating that. Whoops. Here's a challenge.
Guys, I think we'll be okay. We're just going to get this turned off.
Okay.
Maybe just a future note, if it says do not use this exit.
It's actually a sexuality
not to do
alarm
that.
that goes off anytime we talk about sex.
So what sets your alarms off relationally? and how do you respond to them? Because seriously, people move from relationship to relationship because their alarms get set off, and those alarms are set off long ago. And unless we encounter those alarms, get the engineer in. That's what I'm the alarm engineer as a psychotherapist. Turn the alarm off or say, this is what you can do in relation to that alarm. So I am gonna close up now, but you have to make a distinction between nourishing relationships and fast food relationships. And I think fast food is great. I really like fast food, but I don't like it all the time. It starts to make me feel sick. So some of the relationships that we have on offer, the easy ones to get, the ones that might feel good in the short term, are a bit like fast food. So real relationships come with rupture and repair. So when things break down, how do you manage it? You've got to bring in respect, and most notably, mutual, authentic recognition. And that means that I recognize what is the same in somebody else as myself, and I realize what's different in somebody else as myself. Those differences can hurt and niggle and annoy, but the question is, how do you respectfully, authentically recognize the other in the face of difference, difficulty, conflict, get through that and keep going? And that's how you build compatibility. And our technological infrastructure isn't so good at managing that right now. It manages avoidance of that. So I'm not against it, but you just have to use it mindfully. And that's me for now. Thank you.
So, speaking of technological infrastructure, I need to mention that this event is being live streamed to the world right now. And what we are doing to take use of this technology and this platform is that this year we are actually receiving questions via text. So the instructions are on both sides, but really quickly, in the to button, just type in 37607. The first line of the message should read UMC 235, again on both sides if you get stuck. And then please type in your question underneath that. As ever, we give priority to students. So I will ask all the students to please indicate that you're a student, and I would ask all the non-students to remain non-students. So thank you. And Matthew, over to you.
Thank you. Start a timer to keep myself honest. So if you would be so kind, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to try something for me. Would you stand up? And so what I'd like you to do, I'll give you a little time to do this and then I'll interrupt, is to shake some people's hands and find out who's around you. And try shaking hands with your left as well as your right. Go. Okay, stop. And only so that you can hear me. To stay standing. Now, the next stage here, what I want you to do is the same thing and don't make any noise. Don't talk. Shake hands. You can shake the same people's hands, new people's hands. Go. Don't talk. I'm going to talk. So keep going. And so notice as you do this that you stay yourself, right? So keep shaking hands. Just move around. You can shake people's hands. You can shake the same people's hands. But notice that as you shake someone's hand, you stay yourself. It seems totally obvious, but it's really important. You stay yourself, they stay themselves, and there's the two of you together forming a system. So I want you to shake hands again. And this time, and you can shake the same people's hands. Don't worry about it. I want you to notice that there's a beginning, middle, end. Go. Middle, end. So how do you keep going? How do you keep going? How do you determine the beginning, middle, and end of this interaction? And then the next one. How does that happen? How do we do that? Okay, you can finish up and have a seat, and I'll just deconstruct that as best as I can for you. And as I tend to do, I think I'm going to move to the other mic so that I can move. I think this mic's dead. It's dead. I'll get the other one. Thank you very much. So, what happened there is that we were able to match somebody else. I like to talk about this as matching. And there are probably other words for it in psychology. Matching is one I've come across in somatics and somatic psychology. Somatics is the field that studies the experience of embodiment, movement, and awareness. And so matching for me is defined by the way that we stay ourselves and come into relationship with other. And so do me a favor and don't read my name. Too late. We're conditioned to match. We do it automatically. I don't know whether it's an inborn thing. There's probably great arguments for that. But we definitely learn how to do it when we're young, and we do it automatically. And some of us will tend to forget about the part that stays, the part of me that stays myself. Other people will tend to forget about the other person. It's all about me, right? Those are some tendencies. There are as many tendencies and ways of being in ourselves and matching others as there are people on this earth. But my worldview is that I am a community of the parts of myself. and that they are in relationship with each other. So there's the part of myself that is grounded, the part of myself that's moving in space, the part of myself that's speaking to you from that place. So it can be very literal in the body. It can also be psychological aspects of myself. So when we come into relationship with others, different parts of who we are going to show up and want to play or want to hide. As far as my bias in speaking to this, I've been married for almost 10 years. So what do I know about dating? Almost nothing at this point. So this is, I only share my experience because what I've got. But let me think for a moment. I think in movement, and it's the parts of myself, right, having a little conversation. And recently I've been asking this question that's scary as heck for me to share here, but I'm going to do it because what this panel's about. How do I make love to space? Which involves, how do I move while you're watching me and enjoy it, right? Pleasure is involved. And one of my fears in bringing that to life is that could put up some kind of freaky boundaries because sexuality is terrifying, right? It's like we meet other people at our edges. So we start with a handshake. We might start with a glance across the room. And then there's the whoa, is that okay? I remember as a teenager learning to meet people's eyes and then going, oh my gosh, they met my eyes. And I still feel that way. Only I've learned at 40 to stand up and enjoy it. So, losing my train a little bit. I feel like the Waz last night. So, if I'm going to make love to space, and that's a generous act, right? So sexuality is generative. As living systems, we organize energy to create aliveness. And then we want to send that aliveness forward to another generation. So we're generous with a lover. And then we find we have a new generation. So this is what living systems do. They generate energy, send it to generations through generosity. We want to send the world to our children. So there was this question I brought up. Man, I'm intimidated by the topic, so I keep losing my train of thought. Back to the movement. Pleasure, which brings a little bit of grounding. I'm going to grab my notes. There's a defensivity that I think comes up a lot in our culture around sexuality, a sense of danger that's there because there's literally the intersection of our beings. And so what I was talking about earlier that I had to come back to is we meet at our edges. Living systems interact at their edges. So you look on the edge of a forest, and that's where the new plants are, as it then might become a field. So as people, we start by shaking hands or this glance across the room. And then we might reach a point where we give a hug. And then to go past that, well, that's called penetration and things like that, right? You can't do that on your iPhone. Not yet. I mean, maybe they'll make an app for it, but I don't know. My wife and I don't use that form. So how we draw our boundaries is critical. Portland schools have outlawed touch. Some of the Portland schools, I know that they've made it so kids aren't allowed to hug because they're scared about what can happen if people touch each other. But if we don't learn touch, take a moment and touch yourself. Oh my God, what a scary instruction. Go. Holy moly. What are the boundaries of how we meet ourselves through touch in the presence of others, even when given an instruction? What is the vulnerability of that? And how do we draw the boundaries to say, this is appropriate now, and this isn't? How do we do that? One way to do it is to just say no. And that's the Portland Schools answer. I think as a culture, it's time we learn something else. I've been creating movement practices for myself around how to circulate touch, around how does energy in my body flow, and what is my relationship of self to self. I'm certified in something called Love on Movement analysis that breaks down different vocabularies about movement. And one basic movement patterning is called body half. One half of myself and the other half of myself. And one side will tend to mobilize against the other, stabilizing. Ballet uses a lot of body half, and then it can go into cross-lateral, which is opposition. That's walking, running. And these are the two most advanced patterns of movement. The most basic is breath.
Sorry,
Body.
Matthew, I think we're going to try and move on.
Oh,
if
I'm
that's okay.
sorry.
That's okay.
I had a timer going, and it never went off. Or I didn't hear it.
That's okay.
Okay. I was like, geez, this seems to be going on forever. So I'm going to leave you on that, and maybe if anyone has questions about body half, I'll explain it later.
I just want to remind you that you can text Matthew a question for more dancing using the UMC 235. Now, Ty, thank
Well,
you.
I feel like a data approach is going to be entirely dull now. So I'm interested in the psychological science of choosing a great mate. And so if we think about intelligent behavior from a psychological perspective, that means what's adaptive, right? What would be the most intelligent thing to do to get whatever it is we want? And I think that's where the crux of it lies. What is it that we exactly want now? And if I can get through all of this, we want a lot of things. We want more than anybody has ever wanted in human history from our romantic relationships, which is great. We should get it all, but it's a challenge. Now, what I'll do is I'll just walk you through some of the science of when you first see somebody. So when you first see somebody, there's a lot of things going on. One of the things that you have a great ability to do is to detect the symmetry in their body and their face. So you can pick up on subtle variations in whether this ear is higher than this ear, or if they're the same size and in the same location. You can pick up on differences in eye size, whether their arms are the same length or different lengths, and a degree to which that happens. And you do it with remarkable accuracy without ever thinking about it. If someone's symmetrical, you find that attractive on average, and that's because in more risky mating environments, it was an outward signal that someone had good genetic health. Okay, and you have to keep in mind, for most of human history, a marriage's been around for about 5,000 years. For 4,800 of those years, life expectancy was under 40 years old. So you were really invested in finding somebody who could survive and also pass along genes that would help your kids survive in mating environments that were very dangerous. Another characteristic we like are secondary sex characteristics. In women, this tends to be the high cheekbone. That's why you put the blush, right, on the cheek, and kind of more pronounced lips. That's why you wear the lipstick. And this is a result of high hormone release during adolescence. For men, it's the kind of V-shaped body. It's that strong, nice, strong kind of Brad Pitt jaw, right? And that's also high hormone release during adolescence. And that's a signal of reproductive health because hormones, when we have it in high release, compromises our immune system. So if someone could survive out of adolescence with that kind of high hormone release, it was a signal of reproductive fitness. So that's, kind of fun and interesting. So right away, off the bat, before you ever even thought about it, even if you said, I don't want to judge anybody on how they look, you've automatically done it within milliseconds. So the other thing that happens is that in modern mating environments, we live a lot longer, right? So what happened about 150, 200 years ago, life expectancy skyrocketed. So it went from 38, 39 years to now we live into our late 70s for the most part. So it kind of doubled. Sometimes people say, why is the divorce rate rising? Why can't we live happily ever after? And I say, well, part of the problem is we have to be with the person for twice as long, right? And before it's like, well, maybe we'll hang out for 15 or 20 years and then that's it. Now you're signing up for a much longer contract. Now, in countries where healthcare is pretty good, right, and most people can get it and get preventative healthcare, and you have these long life expectancies, why choose somebody who's good looking? Well, there's a lot of data on that, actually, and there's no adaptive benefit to choosing someone who's good looking in countries where there's good healthcare. They're no healthier than anybody else. In fact, if you choose a guy who's got that V-shaped body, he'll live 2.5 years less than someone who has just a more kind of pencil-shaped body. So there's some of these things that actually work against us now, right, in the very different mating environment that we have. Now, there's something interesting that happens. So if you trigger lust, right, because you think someone's attractive, we can actually watch what happens in your brain now. So we can put you under an fMRI, which is kind of like video, and we can watch your brain in motion. So we show you a picture of a hot person, and it looks like we just gave you cocaine, okay? And so you see all these pleasure centers light up, and the fascinating thing about the neuro on this is this. The areas in your prefrontal cortex that are associated with impulse control and planning and goal setting, judicious goal setting, shut down. So it's not just that they're not active, it's actually that they become deactivated. So sometimes people say, use your head, and literally they are not, okay? It's an emotion-driven, appetitive, positive kind of thing, dating, and it's really unique in that way. It's not cost-benefit, it's a totally benefit-driven process, especially for adolescents. Most of us outgrow that by early adulthood, but not all of us. The other thing that happened for most of human history was that resources were scarce. So drinking water, food, threat from predators, all of these things were much more threatening and threatened your survival. So you wanted somebody who had resources. If somebody was a great hunter or a great gatherer or whatever, and they had a lot of resources to feed you and to feed your family and feed your kids, that was an attractive thing. Now, how does all this change now in a wealthy nation with good health care when people still think that people are physically attractive? That's the first thing they see. That's the first signal, especially on things like Tinder. That's about all you get. And what happens when they can judge socioeconomic status just from hearing somebody's voice or just from looking at their appearance with a pretty good degree of accuracy? I'm not saying this is good. I'm just saying it happens, okay? Well, what you find is this. If you ask people what they want in a romantic partner, they'll say they want someone kind or they want someone with good character or all these other things that are not true. And now what we can do with online dating and with speed dating and all these other studies, when we can actually watch what happens when the rubber hits the road, is that people go for looks and money as two of their top 3 wishes for traits and partners. And that's probably not a surprise, right, when you kind of think about it. We never like to think it's true for ourselves, but if you watch what people do, it is overwhelming. Some of the OkCupid data will make you cry at how much physical attractiveness drives the interaction. Now, you think about that. If you swipe left on somebody, for example, you have totally gotten rid of them. You got rid of their kindness, you got rid of their intelligence, you got rid of their emotional stability, you got rid of everything based on one characteristic that's not adaptive any longer in modern mating environments. So that's interesting. So I wrote this book called The Science of Happily Ever After, and I just had this really simple question. I thought, how do you make an intelligent decision about choosing a romantic partner, which is probably the most important decision you'll make your entire life, while you're falling madly in love, okay? So while your prefrontal cortex is shut down and you look like you're on coke and all this other stuff's going on, how on earth are you going to make a good decision? And one of the things I thought is, well, if people thought about this before they got themselves into trouble, right? So if you thought about this before you fell into lust with somebody, you'd have a much better chance. And I'm pretty agnostic about this. I don't care who you choose. You choose whoever is good for you. But we have a lot of data now about who tends to be a good partner. Now, before we do that, what was it that we want now? Well, around the 1800s, around the Romantic era, actually, when fairy tales and all these other things became prolific, a lot of things changed. A lot of things changed culturally. Music became much more emotional, right? Much more passionate. And it became a moral imperative at that point to live a passionate life, to live a very emotionally charged life. And this shifted to marriage. People started to see marrying for love as a moral imperative rather than a nice side effect of living with somebody. It's a huge shift, okay? So now, here's what we want. We want someone who's hot, we want someone with a lot of resources, and we want to be happy, and we want to be happy ever after, which is about 50 or 60 years, okay? That's a big, long list, okay? And that's all right. You can get it, but it's hard. So the divorce rate's about 45%. The permanent separation rate's about another 10% that never gets reported in census statistics. About 7 to 10% of couples are chronically unhappy. So you have about a 1 in 3 chance of getting this, okay? So if you're talking about happily ever after, you get about a 1 in 3 chance. It's not great odds. You'd be better off flipping a coin, probably. But what we know now from longitudinal studies is this, and these are studies where they catch couples before they ever meet each other sometimes, is that the traits and characteristics of your partner are strongly predictive of how your relationship will end up as far as satisfaction and stability. There are traits that you can look for, whether it's in online dating or face-to-face interactions, that will improve your odds from 33% up to 75 to 80% of finding a happily ever after. But people left to their own devices rarely do this. I'll just give you 2 quick examples. One example would be, now think about this real quick. If you had 3 wishes for traits in a partner, what would you wish for? I know this is awkward, some of you here with your partner, so you have to say it out loud. But, hopefully you got it, but think about that real quick. What would you wish for if you, okay? Yeah, honesty, that's a great, man, that's huge. Compassion, another great one. Yeah, kindness, adventurousness, great. Yeah, personality, yeah, these are all great ones. Good character, all these other. Now, let me give you 2 examples of these, and some of these are ones we heard. Emotional stability, if I had to make a #1 draft pick in the mating game, I would choose emotional stability. And you might say, well, Ty, that's common sense. But if you watch what people actually do, it drops to 6th or 8th in the priority list. Why would you not want somebody who's emotionally stable, right? It's predictive of satisfaction, predictive of stability, and all kinds of other things. I'll give you one other quick example, and then I'll close up. Have you ever brought somebody out to meet your friends, and then that person leaves, and you say, so what'd you think? And they say, well, he was nice. Well, that sucks, right? You're like, is that, you're almost offended. Like, they're just nice. Look, nice people, if I had a second pick in the draft, it would be kindness. And what we see is that kind people are generous. They're more empathic in motivation. They're more empathically accurate, so they actually get it. They see marital interactions and dating interactions not as a I give one, you give one. They see it as a thing of trust. I will give freely, and I'll give a lot, so I'm going to trust you're going to do the same in the long run. And those are exactly the kinds of traits and characteristics that you want. Sometimes people say, well, this kind of stinks, right? That traits stay stable, and you're stuck with that person with these same traits for forever. But I always say, but what if you chose someone awesome? What if you chose someone with great traits? That means you get somebody who's happy, emotionally stable, and kind for the rest of your life. And those are far better things to choose on than the things that we're wired to biologically.
Well, I guess I'm last in this panel. I'm impressed by all of y'all's accomplishments and the comments that you all made. I myself am not a dating expert at all or a relationship expert. I'm just a millennial living in New York City. Probably one of the only non-married friends in my group of friends. Maybe that's why I'm on the panel. But nothing is wrong with that. I am dating someone. I can provide comments on that. But maybe I'll just tell you about my experience and the sage advice that I can provide. Hopefully you guys take it. So living in New York City is definitely a battle in terms of dating. Are all you guys here from like Colorado or anyone from like a metropolitan area? Raise your hand. So metropolitan area, hands raised. Okay. So growing up, I grew up in the suburbs of Shaker Heights, Ohio, a really small suburban community. Everyone knew each other. I went to an all-girls school my entire life for 15 years, preschool through 12th grade. Did boarding school for a semester in New York City just for shits and giggles, I guess you could say. Came to New York, college and grad school, and lived my life. The transition, though, for me from suburban Ohio to New York was a huge wake-up call. Going to an all-girls school for 15 years was definitely an amazing experience. Gained leadership skills, confidence, whatnot. But I know that when I went to college, it was definitely a transition. So freshman year of college, I worked after school, taught math, whatnot. So I took morning courses. And of course, in the morning, you have athletes because they have to be in practice in the afternoon. So first day of school, I'm in my English class, and I open the door. and it's about 20 football players and just me in this class. And I'm like, okay, I can handle this. So I'm in class having a great time. I did take AP classes in high school, so for me, freshman year of college was like snooze, like easy. But you have to take these requirements. So I remember, getting to campus, going to the first day of class, and class continued, and the young men in the class would say, oh, well, Kathleen, like, let us raise our hands, or let us speak up, or let us take a leadership role or position. And it's not that I didn't want them to, it's just I was accustomed for 15 years of my life to just being a leader, speaking up, taking charge. And why I give this example is because this leadership taking chargeness has translated into my dating life in terms of the choices that I've made. So I could be married right now if I want to. I could have kids. I could, have a picket fence. But I'm making the choices that I want because of what I want in my life. And because of that, translating back to the all-girls experience. So how this relates to dating. So from college, I was very headstrong, met a ton of guys, had great times, but just really didn't find anything that I wanted. When I was in college, I think OkCupid had just begun, like, beta testing. This was like 10 years ago. It was a time where there was a transition between face-to-face interactions to electronic discourse with dating, I guess you could say. And as college went on, I went to grad school. Grad school was really busy, and I was like, you know what? Let me try online dating. It's the only time I ever tried it in my entire life. It was not the best experience, but I say if you guys want to do it, definitely do it. But through online dating, as everyone's probably mentioned on this panel so far, it is kind of hard to get to know someone's authentic self. And I think what I might be an expert in, though it may not be dating, is being authentic. And so I know that I want someone who respects my opinion, who is lets me speak up and they step back when I need that space. Someone who loves to travel, someone who loves to eat, all these different things. But I think though with online dating, you can definitely communicate these wants and desires, but it's a little bit harder to do it when you have one page, 2 sentences to say who you truly are. And so in New York City, it's definitely hard. New York City is a big beast. You can meet as many people as you want, or you can meet as few people that you want, and it's kind of lonely at times in terms of the dating scene. I actually met my boyfriend in Dallas, not even New York. I met him at a wedding, caught the bouquet, on Valentine's Day, which is my favorite holiday, last year, and in terms of dating, I guess you could say, like, I think at the end of the day, you want to find someone who's a great match for you. And I believe that, marriage is definitely not for everyone. Sometimes it's just a partnership that you need. Sometimes it's a relationship for the moment. But I know I am inspired, though, by the ancestry in my family. With my great-grandparents, who I knew were married for 72 years. My grandparents currently alive, married 65 years. My parents, who are alive and married 35 years. So for me, I feel like that has been a inspiration for me, especially growing up as an African American in America, with so many people saying, the rates of marriage for African Americans particularly are lower, and Black women, women of color. And so I don't know if it's my mission in life to kind of like fight that stereotype, but I think that I am deserving, and I think that I will find, if my boyfriend's my match, then maybe he's my future husband. I have no clue. But I think that, I guess, what I'm trying to communicate to my friends in my peer group is that women of color are worthy and are accepting and require love as well. A couple of years ago, I started like an ad hoc group on Facebook that's private called the Courtship Challenge. And it was started by 5 of us, just friends in New York, and it's expanded to maybe a group of like 200 people so far from all around the United States, and everything's completely anonymous. Like, I might see you on the street, and I might not know who you personally are, but I would never be like, hey, Sally, like, remember that time when we spoke about the Courtship Challenge? It's completely anonymous. So in this dating group that we've created, it's people who've been married, currently married, divorced, separating, single, looking for something, and we pose questions to each other about relationships. So whether it be, I've been married for 3 years, had the fairy tale wedding of my life. It's a friend of mine, this happened to her. I noticed that my husband began cheating on me. How do I regain my identity, get out of this relationship, and perhaps start dating someone new again? Because, once you get married, people have gone to your wedding, they've taken pictures, they feel like they're part of your life, your marriage, even though they really should not be, in my opinion. But our relationship group, the Courtship Challenge, is to really like talk about those hard issues that you normally can't talk about, or you may not want to talk about with your best friend because it's something that's really personal. So I guess that's my solution that I've kind of created. I don't know if I want to say in response to online dating, but kind of using technology as a platform to talk about issues, ideas, and whatnot related to the world of dating and mating.
Thank you, Kathleen, and all of our panelists. Again, the name of this panel is Intelligent Dating and Mating, and I want to remind all the audience members that this event is being live streamed, and you can send in your questions via text to the number 37607, and in the message of the communication, write UMC 235. I just want to do a quick snap poll. Please raise your hand if you are currently or have ever done online dating. Interesting. So with that in mind, the first question from the audience, and this is one for the entire panel, is, in your opinion, does social media help or hurt dating?
I can start.
Sure.
Social media is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used in a good way or a bad way. So I wouldn't come across and say that it does one thing or the other. It's the way in which you engage with it. And I think if you engage with it mindfully and you're clear with yourself about what you're looking for, it can be a great tool. Different kinds of personalities use it in different ways. So those of us that are more introverted might find that we can get a step out there a little bit more quickly because there's that level of space. But you've got to get up the courage to move that next bit. So if that's a starting point, that's fine. But I think one thing that Ty said that I really enjoyed is that when you swipe left, you're swiping away all of this potential. And that's why I think Tinder does a particular kind of a job. And if that's the job that you're looking for and that's what you're prepared for, then you make that choice. If you're looking in that space to use that tool to find something more fulfilling, it can happen. I've seen it happen. But you might want to look and use different tools in order to make that happen.
I think that's a great answer.
Anyone else on the panel?
I have no experience using social media for dating, so I can't speak to it in a direct form. But what I can speak to is how it facilitates people finding common ground from which to gather. So I've used social media. Last week, I set up an ecstatic dance session. Ecstatic dance is essentially you've got a room set up with some cool lighting and a DJ, and everyone shows up and dances, and they're not drunk. And that's what ecstatic dance is, in my view. So we set up this ecstatic dance thing, and social media was huge to getting people there. And I had an experience there where a friend of mine, a new friend, probably in his late 50s, had a mind-blowing experience of being very turned on by a woman that he danced with. And he called me, and he said, "What was that?" And I do contact improvisation. Who here is familiar with that? Beautiful. So contact improvisation is where you're in contact with another person and you use your sensory abilities to share rolling or shifting contact. You can pick each other up, and it engages a kind of intelligence about the kinesthetic sense. And so I danced with him a bit, doing contact. He'd never done anything like it before. And this woman that he was really turned on by, I had danced with her a lot. She has a fair amount of experience with that. I don't know if they danced together. But I know that he was terrified by what came up because it brought out this, like, what do I do with this feeling? And now he gets to deal with that and it's a really positive thing, I think, that he's dealing with, but scary. And it came about because of an event he found on Facebook.
I guess so. In terms of social media and how it might impact dating, I think your example of like, yes, you can use the internet, social media to find events, but in terms of curating your own profile, I look at it as not just a dating thing, but just like a human being thing. When I hire people, I own a restaurant as well. So when I look to hire people, I definitely look at their profile. Like if someone just has a whole bunch of selfies, I'm like, hey, like maybe you don't have friends, or B, not a negative thing, or B, like you're not confident in yourself to take a picture with a group of people. I also look in terms of people's interests at the same time. Like, I like people who are able to curate their own content, meaning they write articles or blog posts or something that's related to them, unique content that they put out there versus just reposting what someone else may post. I know that also on social media, my friends who do use like Bumbler. Bumble. Sorry, I'm like Bumbler. I think it's really unique that it can track who your friends are, who a third-party friend could be. So I think it's a little bit more reassuring in terms of safety these days, in terms of making sure you're not abducted or in an inappropriate situation, or in terms of like age range, if it may be a minor versus with an adult. I think it's definitely great to have a safety net related back to someone's verified profile. So I think that's interesting versus when like Match.com came out, like 20 years ago or whatnot, there was really no way to verify if who you're talking to is a real person.
Yeah, I think that accountability piece is huge because with all, I took an Uber to the airport in New York and that was great, and I rated my driver, it was a great ride, but it's almost always a great ride because I always rate my driver, right? Dating's not that way. So I think with online dating, and if we're going to lump online dating underneath social media, I think that's interesting, right? We don't rate our dates, and that's fraught with its own kind of problems, right? But that's a problem in some place like New York City, and I agree, New York City can be a tough place to date. But it's kind of like there's just infinite number of people that folks could date there, and they could infinitely do that for their life and never go out with the same person twice. And there's no accountability for their behavior about how they act on a date, and so I think that creates some kind of dangerous situations sometimes, or less than optimal situations. So I'd like to see, I think with artificial intelligence, they'll develop systems that can be smart and fair about how to have evaluation in these kind of interpersonal contexts.
So thank you all. I think that's a really good segue to the next audience question. So far, the conversation has revolved around online dating. What does intelligent mating and dating look like where smartphones are not involved?
Well, it usually looks pretty awkward now. So, there's a new book out by Sherry Turkle. She's a professor at Northwestern, and it's about what's it been like for the first generation that's been totally raised with a phone in front of their face the entire time. And there's some evidence to suggest that they're having a hard time with social interactions, just things like eye contact that you can actually track. They have a hard time doing it, and I'm sure I would too if I was in that same situation. So I think it's pretty awkward right now, and people aren't quite sure how to do it. I think it's, in my opinion, I think it's one of those things everybody wants. Everyone's like, wouldn't it be great if we could just meet face to face? But then we're kind of too nervous to do it because we think we'll be weirdos, if we ask to meet face to face.
I think I'd like to just add to that social media, anything that mediates a relationship reduces complexity. So you become reliant on low complexity interaction, text messaging, WhatsApping each other, talking to each other on Facebook. And high complexity interrelating is actually really challenging. Maintaining eye contact, working through conflict. Somebody wants to go to one restaurant, somebody else wants to go to the other restaurant. So managing complexity, I would say, is a huge skill in a relationship, and it's a skill that develops over time. And I'd say one of the big clues if you're dating or mating or been in a series of relationships, if you notice the same pattern going on over and over again, like always after the 5th or 6th date, or a relationship that lasts a year and a half and then breaks down. And I'm not saying that the ideal relationship is one that lasts forever. I think relationships change. But if you notice, the third relationship around, that the same kind of things are happening, there's probably something going on in your psychological dynamic that needs addressing. So that's a real clue to yourself. This relationship starts to feel like the last one, which feels like the last one. So what do I need to address within myself rather than expecting to find someone else who's going to do it for me?
Great, thanks. This is a question for Matthew. How do we successfully counter the need for connection through touch in a relationship when technology causes problems with distancing ourselves?
Can I hear that again? I want to make sure I get it right.
Sure. How do we successfully counter the need for connection through touch in a relationship when technology causes problems with distancing ourselves?
Turn it off. Just turn it off. That's, yeah. And then what happens? And it is awkward. I mean, I've been married almost 10 years, and it's still awkward. It's insanely awkward. And to sit in that and breathe with each other and be honest. And there's a lot of assumptions in this room. We're all carrying assumptions about what relationships should look like. I've been challenging some of mine. I'm hugely challenging monogamy these days. I'm polyamorous. I get it. Doesn't mean I'm going to start having sex with everyone, but I'm attracted to a lot of people, and that's a good thing. I'm in love more and more and more. And it doesn't mean that I need to sleep around. Maybe it does. I don't know. But we assume things because of what we see around us, and we expect ourselves to be like it, and we judge ourselves and we judge our partners against these stories. And what happens when we realize that we are unique, the person we're with is unique, and the relationship between the two of us is unique, and we start there? That's my answer.
Thank you. This is a student question for Kathleen. Do you ever feel you need to compromise your leadership traits in your relationships, or do men respect what you bring?
I hope they respect what I bring. I know I've definitely ended relationships because of myself being stubborn, but I've also learned that, certain times I just need to step back and let someone else let their stars shine, and that's completely fine. But I think it's also about finding balance. My business partner, she's super, super accomplished. Like, I'm so amazed and proud of all that she's done. But she has been dating a guy who's really great, but he's like on TV, he's well known. If someone asked what his name was, people would know him over her, but her accomplishments, in my opinion, outshine his. And so I told her, I was like, I think that you might need someone who might be able to step back a little bit so that your star can shine even brighter. Because it's hard to be in a relationship where like oil and oil like go together. That doesn't work. You need a little bit of friction or a little bit of difference to kind of make sustainable, healthy relationships, in my opinion. So I know that I've naturally sought out men who are great and special in their own ways, but don't need to be as vocal about it. Like, yeah.
Remember, this is being live streamed.
Oh, I didn't say her name, didn't say my boyfriend's name.
Just kidding.
But
Just teasing.
anonymous.
So this is a question for Ty and for Aaron. How can you measure the extent to which you can match with somebody?
You want to go first?
Sure. This is a little controversial, actually, in the dating circles, I guess. But it's a big deal, right? Because if you go on like Match.com, well, that's actually what it's called. Match, it's based on matching. A lot of the other services are based on matching. They say they'll use an algorithm to find you happily ever after, basically, right? So here's the fascinating thing about matching. Matching's great for attraction. So if you have similar things that you like to do, if you have similar cultural background, all these kinds of things, it's a really big impetus. Birds of a feather do flock together instead of opposites attract, okay? So if you're an online dating company, you think that's great because we get people on first and second dates, right? Now, in longitudinal studies where they track people for 10, 20, 30 years and see what happens when they match versus don't match, here's what you find. It doesn't really matter, okay? So if you think about personality, which is one of the things that a lot of the big companies match you on, it doesn't matter if your personality matches. It just matters if someone has a bad personality, okay? But the problem then from the dating company's perspective is they're going to lose about 25 to 33% of their customer base because they have traits that are relatively undesirable or predict bad relationships in the long run. So I think it's a really interesting thing. You want to be looking for quality people. You don't want to be looking necessarily for matches, unless it comes to like values and some attitude values. So like religious values, if that's a strong thing for you, matching on that is helpful in the long run. Child rearing beliefs are another good thing to match on that actually predicts in the long run. But very few other things do. But I'm just talking about these kind of broad measures. I think in the day-to-day interactions, being able to match or handle your mismatches, I think that's where the magic actually happens. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this one is kind of an unmeasurable, and I take an existential perspective on it. That, in a sense, you're making a choice every minute of every second of every minute of every day, or you're not making that choice. And it's kind of about being honest with yourself and honest with your partner about what's going on, and in a sense, deciding whether you want to remain in that relationship or don't remain in that relationship. And I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer to it. It's your life. You just have to make that choice. I think what makes that choice very difficult is this kind of cultural expectation about people who've been in relationship for a long time. People who have been in relationship for a long time, you had the numbers before, aren't necessarily happy. And people who get out of relationships haven't necessarily given it everything it needs to see if it could carry on going. So there's no right answer to say these people have been married for 40 years, so they must be all right, and this person divorced after 15. Something must have got wrong. So it's really how you choose whether to stay or whether to go, whether you're prepared to invest more into it if it's not working. And unfortunately, I don't think there's an algorithm for it, and I think it's a very, very difficult choice to make, and that's the fun of being on this planet with other people. It's the challenge, but I think it can be fun too. It's exciting, and I think we have to surrender to the fact that we may not know.
So one of the challenges that almost every couple faces is that of long-distance relationships. And I'm wondering, Kathleen, if you and Matthew can talk about what you've seen works well, what doesn't, and how can technology or social media help maintain those relationships?
Yeah, I am in a long-distance relationship. Did I mention that? Oh, okay. I live in New York. My boyfriend lives in LA. So I think technology has been a great asset in terms of long-distance relationships. I think you can definitely cultivate a healthy relationship and get to know someone at a distance through FaceTiming, Facebook video, whatnot. But I guess I think back to like when my grandparents were just starting to date and they got engaged. My grandfather was, like World War II at this point? Yeah. And he was stationed somewhere like in Oklahoma, going somewhere overseas or I don't know what. And he wrote my grandmother a letter every single day, and she keeps this like to this day. And I love that though they were not able to see each other for 6-9 months at a time, they were able to have these like tangible letters. And I think it's unfortunate that like our equivalent of letter writing is through texting and through WhatsApp. And I know that at least in my relationship, we do try to make concerted efforts to writing emails. I might not handwrite a letter, but I know that when I travel, at least, I travel quite a bit internationally, I always write a postcard, so at least they know in the moment, like, I'm thinking of you, it's stamped with the date, whatnot, and it brings back that nostalgia that was very prominent when my grandparents were dating and growing up. But I think long-distance relationships can definitely be healthy if both people know who they are, because if you're going to get in a relationship, regardless if the person lives in New York and you live in New York, or if you guys are bi-coastal, if you continue to seek out other relationships out of the one that you're in, you're destined to failure, in my opinion, just because you're not focusing your entire energy, spirit, and psyche on one person. And social media can lead to some sticky situations if your mind is swaying a bit, just because in terms of intentions, you could be commenting on someone else's picture and saying something the other person sees that, or you're out with friends at night and someone gets too close in the picture and you post it online, like that might not be a good look. But I think though that the time difference between like me posting an inappropriate picture perhaps and me waking up the next day to deal with the repercussions is completely facilitated through social media. If it was letter writing, they would never know.
In natural systems, diversity brings resilience. So what are some examples of that? In your garden, like the monoculture crops we have, right? Some bug comes along and wipes out a whole crop. You have a garden with all sorts of different kinds of plants. A bug comes along and maybe knocks out, your eggplants. but you've still got your tomatoes, you've still got your basil, you've still got whatever. You get it, I think. So I want to counter this idea that if all your thoughts aren't about this one person, the relationship is bound to fail, and actually go the opposite way. And say that, and we come down to this question of distance. So I think one of the functions of distance, one of the best things about my relationship with my wife today is that we know how to give each other the space so I can be here talking to you, and all my thoughts aren't about her. In fact, I've seen some beautiful people I've really enjoyed being in interaction with and found myself kind of in love. And that's great. And I will bring that love home. And it doesn't mean that just because the thoughts aren't about her, they aren't relevant to her, they don't support her. So there are other narratives of relationship, and ours is about ownership in our culture. It comes from agriculture. It comes from the sense that we need to own someone. It is the narrative around Valentine's Day, which I'm in opposition to you. I'll just be openly in opposition while being in love with you at the same time. And say that Valentine's Day is my least favorite holiday, except for in kindergarten and through maybe 5th grade, where they give everyone a Valentine's Day that says, I love you. They have no idea what it means, but they do. And then we get into this idea of ownership, that everything has to be about this one person. And then if that's true for me, I resent it. Because diversity is huge for me to learn, right? We learn how to be ourselves by being in relationship to others. So it doesn't mean, and I got really literal earlier, talking about handshaking, then hugging, then penetration, right? It does not mean penetration. It does not mean we need to have our hands all over someone's genitals. Maybe it does for certain people. That may be my future. I have no idea. But I know that for today, it is good enough to look into someone's eyes and have a meaningful conversation, to dance together, to interact and be in love. And it's different for different people. But distance can create the chance for that diversity sometimes if we don't know how to do it in proximity.
So I think that's a great bridge to another student question. And Matthew and Ty, if I could ask you to take this, please. For those people in the room who this is still kind of a fairly new process, maybe perhaps for all of us, how do you determine what your core values are, and what's the best way for you to determine what the core values of your mate are?
Well, I think most people know. That would be my take on it. I think I'm not a therapist full time or anything like that. It's been a while since I've done it, actually. But one of the things I always believed and was taught to believe is that the client oftentimes has a good answer in there somewhere. It actually kind of bugs me sometimes when some therapists get this kind of God complex and they think they have all the right answers and they're just going to bestow the information upon somebody. I don't think that's how any good human relationship works. Rarely, right? Unless you're talking about little kids or something like that. Usually what happens is the people you're with that you love help you discover something that you already know to be true, either about yourself or about the world and your view about that. So that would be my take on it. And we don't always take the time to do that in our culture, right? Our culture sometimes makes it hard to focus in on it and focus in on what our values are and who we are, the things that we care about and the things that we want in somebody else. But I think if you give people the time and give people the space to do it, they find the right answers on their own.
My answer to most existential dilemmas is when you get the chance, roll around on the floor. And I mean that totally literally. Because we find our groundedness. We get to feel all edges of ourselves, the diverse ways we can be supported. So how do we find ourselves? Take the time to roll around on the floor. You go into brainstem level activity. You drop your ego, your cognitive mind, and you find out who you are, and then roll around on top of someone else. And you find out who are you together. That's an embodied answer for you.
Again, the segues keep piling up, but I'll direct this one to Aaron. And maybe in follow-up to what Matthew just said, Does sleeping with another person while in a relationship have to mean that you no longer love or respect your partner?
It can mean that. It doesn't have to. People make all sorts of different decisions. People have all sorts of arrangements in their relationships. For some people, sex and attachment can be different. For other people who are poly, for example, you can experience sex and love with multiple people. That doesn't diminish the love from the other people that are involved. In fact, I've been really toying with writing a paper called The Myth of Heteronormativity, because I don't think I've ever seen heteronormal people. Because actually you get inside relationships and you see how relationships are run. And the great thing is that we get to choose how to do our relationships. The difficult thing is finding someone who wants to make those choices with you, so there's a doing together rather than a done to. And by doing together, I don't mean you have to do everything together, but if you have an open and honest discussion, there's open communication, willingness and desire there to let somebody else sleep with somebody else, that can happen. If it happens outside of consent, that still doesn't mean that that person doesn't respect you anymore or doesn't love you anymore. It means something happened that can be explored. And the relationships that recover from deep ruptures, hidden affairs, finding out things that you didn't know about, I'm not saying that there's a must. It might be too much and you need to check out of that relationship. But if you're prepared to see what that was all about and work through it, usually it comes to a much, much closer place. Hopefully you don't have to do it that way, and you can decide what the rules of your relationship are together, and that might change over time.
Question for Kathleen. In a place like Boulder, which is predominantly white, what is your initial thinking on how we can find and hold on to differences, whether it's difference of thought, political persuasion, sexual orientation, gender, ethnicity?
Because I'm not that familiar, though, with Boulder, is there an issue, though, preserving those identities?
I think it's bad luck, probably.
Oh. I think that differences can be recognized anywhere. I think that the need is just to make people feel included versus being outliers, I guess you could say. I'm not an expert, definitely not an expert on this subject, but I think, though, that difference of thought, sexual orientation, opinion, whatnot, can definitely be preserved. But I think that, in my opinion, for there to be mass recognition of it, someone always has to be the martyr in some ways and stand out there and show, this is my type of love, this is beautiful in my opinion, this is how I want to express it to the world. So I think that if you're closed-minded, or I think if you're afraid to express yourself in that way, it might be a hard community or environment to be in. But I think that in my opinion, there's probably a ton of support for different identities that aren't vocalized or that aren't seen here to express themselves. I don't know if anyone on the panel would want to validate or.
Yeah, I went to school here actually back in the day, and it was just about as white then as it is now. So and that's fine. But yeah, I think it's hard to know. I think it's hard to know until you're actually in an environment where you're close to people who actually hold different beliefs or come from different backgrounds. I think we can intellectually wonder about these things as much as we want, myself included, about differences. But I think until you're actually, working with somebody or you're actually, friends with somebody, it's hard to really know. And even then, right, it's a learning process that takes years, I think. So I think there are probably some challenges that would exist just by the nature of, not having access to more diverse kinds of viewpoints and cultures and those kinds of things sometimes.
Great, thanks. We have another question for Ty. Is there any common denominator in chronically unhappy marriages?
Yes. So I can tell you. In fact, there's two main things. And the story of how it gets there is a more interesting story. So it's essentially demand with what they call a demand withdraw pattern. So you have somebody in a relationship who's demanding, usually with contempt, that they want something more from the relationship. There's somebody on the other end who's withdrawing from that request. The fascinating thing in the lab is if you watch heterosexual men with their female partner who just asking for something, a lot of times completely reasonable requests, they have to increase the strength of the request over time because guys don't listen, right? And men will actually assume this position that primates use where they are kind of huddled over and self-soothing their shoulders because they don't know how to handle the situation. It's this demand withdrawal pattern. It's actually the behavioral hallmark of couples that end up either divorcing or being unhappy. The thing that happens psychologically is that you start to make attributions or you start to attribute cause or blame to one place. So if you think about what causes problems in a relationship, it could be me, it could be my partner, it could be the interaction between us, right? Or it could be some external thing. Maybe I have really obnoxious friends or family or something like that, right? And that could stress the relationship. Conflictual couples overwhelmingly blame their partner's characteristics for why things go wrong. You could get stuck in traffic. They're like, why are you so lazy? You know, or why are you so stupid? And it's like, I didn't make this happen, you know? And so I think whether it's in a laboratory or whether it's, you know, in couples therapy, if you see those components in place, things have gone really wrong. And I think the thing, if I had to give a piece of advice about that, we know that couples come to couples therapy about 2 years too late. And so these patterns have become so entrenched and people have become so bitter from these interactions, as one could certainly understand, that it's much harder then to repair the damage that's been done. So as soon as you start to see these things emerge, I think it's time to get in.
Folks, we are almost out of time, so if you have a question, please send it in now. One question for the entire panel is attraction a choice? Is being attracted to somebody a choice?
I mean, I would say attraction is not a choice, and I think what Ty said earlier ties into that. You're going to feel attracted to people. You're going to feel attracted to people even if you're in a monogamous relationship. The choice is what you want to do about that. But I think that visceral draw towards someone that comes up, hopefully it will come up for the rest of your life, and it won't just be attracted. It won't just be your partner, because it's actually something to enjoy. You can enjoy it within yourself. It's completely natural. We're animals as well as human beings, and I think sometimes we can just notice that. It's the behavior, it's the choice what you do with it that counts.
I love your answer.
Yeah, I would obviously agree. You know, I think attraction is just this very automatic, almost reflexive kind of response. What you do with it is certainly the most important thing. The one wrinkle I might toss in is there's some people you meet who you find kind of attractive, right? Have you ever had this happen? You meet someone who's kind of attractive. And then you give them a chance, you get to know them a little bit, and you're like, well, look at that. They're getting more attractive as time goes on, right? And I think sometimes those are really like extra sweet, awesome relationships to have when, and I always make the difference between getting someone who's attractive enough, like kissing your partner shouldn't be like eating your veggies. I mean, you don't want somebody that you're not attracted to. But there's a difference between being attracted to somebody and getting the hottest person possible, right? Those are two different things. But our natural inclination is to try to maximize and optimize on hotness and wealth. Instead, we should think like, well, am I attracted? And then from there, let it simmer for a little bit and see what happens with that. And sometimes I think those are some of the best surprises.
I completely agree. A really good friend of mine, she was like, oh, I'm in my late 30s. I haven't found my husband yet. Like, what am I doing wrong? And so she kind of categorized, like, what she preferred in life, and everything was pretty on the surface level in terms of relationships. So she's like, let me try to start digging deeper. And she met a gentleman who's now her husband who didn't meet any of the characteristics that she originally listed, and he wasn't super wealthy. He had a job, but he wasn't like an executive yet. He liked to travel, but hadn't been international. He was a little bit overweight, and he wasn't someone that should go to a bar or a restaurant or out and be like, you know what, I'm going to talk to you tonight. But she was like, you know what, I'm going to start living my life without being so superficial. Once she did that, her life completely changed. And she's actually inspired me in many ways to deal with relationships and whatnot, to be like, okay, this person might not have everything that I want right now, but do they have potential earning power is one way that you could say it, or potential, like, being power in some ways, because like who you are today is not who you're going to be tomorrow. And the point of a relationship is to grow, change, and evolve as a couple. And now they're married. They've got a baby on the way this month. And, you know, if she hadn't stepped back, I don't think she'd be where she is today.
Great. So one last question, and this is for the panel. How does online porn impact dating and mating? And is it good or bad?
I'm for it. Like, I think it's healthy. Like, human beings are sexual in nature. I think that, you know, certain activities your partner might not feel comfortable doing. And so you might resort to that to kind of stimulate your mind in those ways. But also, I think that, you know, being in a long distance relationship, like if you can't have that physical touch, which is definitely crucial, I think that there's other ways to sexually express oneself, and that one way or one method is through porn. And I think that in my opinion, I think if the porn is not derogatory or obviously illegal, I'm all for it. But other forms of pornography that are degrading and just illegal, I just am not a proponent of that.
You know, I think I'm sorry. I think I'd agree with that, and but I think one thing is with teenagers, right? There has to be a dialogue around that as well. I was speaking to a reporter the other day, and she's a journalism student still, and she said that sex can be like rugby sometimes, you know, and it's just not it's not pleasurable because some of these boys have been raised on pornography that does not depict a pleasurable interaction. So I think for teenagers who are still developing and learning about things, it has to be accompanied by some talk about what some of these different behaviors mean and what actually is healthy sexual behavior, because there's somebody else involved, right? It's not just a one-person game. There's two people there.
I've been really fascinated by porn lately. Yeah. And I don't like most anything I see. Because of that, because what I tend to see is this, like, the best way I can say it is banging. Like, that doesn't personally turn me on. It doesn't turn me on in its nature, in my actual lovemaking. It doesn't turn me on when I see it. What I want to find, and it's probably out there, and I probably just haven't done the research because I still am kind of like, whoa, am I really going to research porn? Is something that shows the sensuality that develops the sexuality. I'm interested in watching the like really advanced foreplay, and that's not what I see. I see these kind of lame stories that we're going to skip over to watch banging. And so personally, that doesn't do anything for me. And it probably does really good things for a lot of people, or it wouldn't be there. But I'm interested in how, because right now porn is a disowned thing. How many people are going to get up on stage and say, I'm really fascinated by porn? Like, I'm into radical honesty, but most people aren't. And so I'm interested in how we develop something. And as a choreographer, I'm actually actively looking for people to work with to create some artistic sexual narratives for the screen, for screen dance, that would be erotic to look at without being about that. And so if you know anyone, please send them my way. And I'm terrified to go into this, but I'm really fascinated. I'm like, what would it be to like deal with these narratives and see if we can up the ante about how we educate ourselves and our culture about how to be good lovers who are in love?
I would say check out Tumblr. Huffington Post just did an article last week on Tumblr and how there's a lot of like women-oriented and feminist porn, and it's not naked bodies per se, but it's kind of beautiful. But you have to turn off like some sort of filter you have to turn off to find it. But there's a huge audience out there for it.
And I just want to add one thing. It's a huge, 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 huge issue. I mean, I think we could talk about that the whole time, but I'm just going to throw a little non sequitur in. A lot of consumption of porn is not about sex at all. And I want to throw the non-sex bit in. It's about distraction, it's about sensation, and it's about a way of avoiding anxiety a lot of time. So a lot of people that are engaging in a kind of not so good way with porn, and I don't think it's a bad thing across the board, it's because they're avoiding some feeling that's arising inside in exactly the same way someone might reach for a drink or someone might reach for drugs or workaholism. So I'd just say, again, it's about porn as a tool, can be really useful, but the way in which you engage in it, you have to ask yourself what's happening just before you engage in that porn. Just like you might say what's happening just before you engage in that quart of Haagen-Dazs, similar kind of a thing. It is another issue, yeah.
Thank you to our incredible panelists. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Yeah.